Looking for trusted vehicle protection? American Guardian Warranty Services has you covered. Since 1998, we've delivered top-tier coverage, award-winning support, and industry-leading training to keep your business moving forward. Every way forward.
Welcome to Daily Drive for Thursday, July 10th, 2025. I'm Jake Neer in Detroit, in for Jamie Butters.
And I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, Volvo Cars axes 15% of its U.S. salaried workforce. Ford and Stellantis get tough on suppliers amid tariffs. And despite big inventories, dealers aren't panicking over the end of EV tax credits. Plus, our own John Irwin joins the show to talk about the latest tariff announcements and what comes next with volatile trade talks.
They want more than anything else for the USMCA to sort of remain like the backbone of automotive trade.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry.
Volvo Cars has cut about 15% of its commercial workforce in the U.S. as part of a global cost-cutting effort. According to a person briefed on the matter, Volvo eliminated about 60 jobs total. Most of them are at its New Jersey headquarters. Some of the cuts were made through attrition. The person tells us at Automotive News that most of the affected workers were hired during the pandemic. Volvo's U.S. field staff is not affected. A Volvo spokesperson said in a statement, quote, Volvo Cars is taking measures to become a leaner, more efficient organization with a structurally lower cost base. They went on to say the reduction, quote, will better position us to build a profitable future for the Americas region and for Volvo Cars overall.
Ford and Stellantis are working to plug potential holes in their supplier contracts. They're trying to mitigate billions of dollars in U.S. tariff exposure and other costs within their supply chains. The automakers are forcing suppliers to sign on to more stringent terms in exchange for tariff cost relief and new business. That's according to supplier executives, attorneys, and a review of contract terms by our sibling publication, Crane's Detroit Business. In Ford's case, the automaker is attempting to roll back a provision that allows suppliers to opt out of contracts on a yearly basis. It's a provision that has been in Ford's terms and conditions for decades, and which suppliers have long used for leverage in negotiations. Stellantis, on the other hand, is distributing new term sheets seeming to assert the enforceability of its contracts. That's after a spate of lawsuits that put a microscope to the legal standing of its supply agreements.
The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement's automotive rules of origin have been a boon for U.S. suppliers, increasing their profits, employment, and revenue. That's according to a study by the U.S. International Trade Commission. But they've also been a slight negative for automakers by those same measures. And maybe counterintuitively, they modestly reduced U.S. imports of vehicles from Canada and Mexico, while the number of imports from countries outside the region inched up. The analysis says from July 2020 through 2024, U.S. parts makers took in about $3.4 billion more in revenue and employed nearly 5,400 more workers than they otherwise would have because of the USMCA's rules. But automakers' revenue from U.S. vehicle production fell $251 million during that period. We'll hear more about this story in a few minutes from our own John Irwin.
And with close to 140,000 electric vehicles on dealership lots across the country, it's a tough time for the new federal budget to eliminate tax credits to help sell those vehicles. And yet, dealers are not panicking. Alex Lawrence is the owner of used vehicle dealership EV Auto in the town of Bountiful, Utah. He says he's confident demand will continue, but that some people might have a tougher time financing EVs.
I'm not really that worried about people no longer thinking they're a good value, no longer wanting them. I am concerned about their ability to qualify to buy one.
Companies including online used vehicle retailer CarMax are encouraging customers to take advantage of the tax credits before they expire. After that, CarMax expects shoppers will still want EVs, but some will focus more on pricing than they did with the incentives. And those are today's headlines. Coming up, we'll get the latest on trade talks with our own John Irwin. That's next on Daily Drive.
Daily Drive listeners like you have access to the lowest price for Automotive News Congress 2025 on September 11th.
The event is where the industry's biggest players tackle its toughest challenges. Congress attendees don't just follow the industry, they lead it.
This year's featured speakers include Hyundai Motor Group Executive Chair Yusin Chung and General Motors CEO Mary Barra.
We are investing in America. We're creating jobs. That's creating IP in this country. And I think, the United States needs to lead in key technologies.
Join us to gain the insights and connections needed to steer your business through massive change.
To get the lowest price for the event, go to autonews.com/events, select Auto News Congress, and type in the discount code Daily Drive, one word, all caps. We'll see you in September in Detroit.
When it comes to vehicle protection, American Guardian Warranty Services has you covered. Since 1998, AGWS has been a trusted leader in F&I solutions, offering top-tier protection plans for autos, RVs, power sports, marine, and more, all backed by A-rated insurance carriers for reliable coverage you can count on. But we don't just offer protection. We deliver results. With award-winning marketing materials, expert dealer training through AGWS University, and exceptional customer service, we are committed to helping your business grow while keeping your customers protected. Join thousands of satisfied dealers and agents who trust AGWS for comprehensive coverage and unmatched support. Visit agws.com or call 800-579-2233 today to keep your business moving forward. Every way forward.
Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Jake Neer with Kellen Walker. It was supposed to be a pivotal week on global trade as President Donald Trump's 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs was scheduled to end on Wednesday, but the president extended the timeline to August 1st. Still, there was plenty of trade-related developments in recent days. Our own John Irwin has been closely following all of them and joins me now from his home office in Ann Arbor to talk about it. John Irwin, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Thanks for having me back.
All right, so tariffs are always a moving target. And so maybe we should say right off the top, we are talking middle of the afternoon on Wednesday right now. So who knows? Things could change, and they have been changing throughout the week. Just bring us up to date. What's going on with tariffs as of recording time right now?
Yeah, as of now, like you said, things can always change, but we're looking at essentially this 90-day pause on country-level reciprocal tariffs has essentially been moved to August 1st. Trump has been sending out letters to various heads of state over the past several days, kind of outlining what the tariff rate for them is going to be moving forward, effective August 1st. For the auto industry, probably the two most important letters that have been sent out so far have been to Japan and South Korea. The U.S. is planning on implementing a 25% tariff on Japanese and South Korean goods by August 1st, or on August 1st, I should say. And yeah, at that point, we're going to see between now and then, are there going to be deals that are going to be hammered out? I know Japan, South Korea have been working, trying to get a deal with the U.S. For the past, several weeks, really the whole 90-day period, but that's proven to be elusive. As we talk right now, the EU is trying to hammer out some sort of framework deal with the U.S. That might, reports indicate that it might be maybe a 10% tariff on European goods. But yeah, all this to say, there's a lot still to be worked out. This deadline has essentially been pushed back a few weeks, which Trump has said that deadline is final and that, that won't be pushed back again. But, we'll see if these 25% tariff rates in Japan and South Korea stick. It's important to note that these are separate from the auto tariffs, which are still in effect. But it does impact the industry in a couple ways, in that any parts that aren't on the auto parts tariff list for the auto tariffs, they are subject to these reciprocal tariffs. So right now, that means everything is basically tariffed at 10% if it's coming from Asia or Europe. Moving forward, it might be 25% if it's a Japanese part coming in or Korean part coming in. We'll see what it is with Europe. But a lot to keep track of, and lots changing, day by day and hour by hour, it seems.
So much at stake in these talks, especially for Japan, it seems like, in the auto companies there. And obviously South Korea, that's where Hyundai is. It's a really, really important country for the auto market. It's interesting to me that, with those letters coming out so similar to what was sort of already announced in terms of that rate, why those were sort of the first two countries to come out, and why they weren't able to come up with something that, I know there was some hope that it would be more like the deal with the UK, and that they could work something out with Trump. Do we have any indication of what happened there?
Yeah, a lot of it seems to stem, especially in Japan's case, over this divide on autos. You go back 3 months. I think most people were expecting that maybe Japan would be one of the first countries to reach a deal with the U.S. because Japan and the U.S. under Trump have kind of had a good working relationship, but there's been a big impasse over autos. Japan has really wanted some sort of carve out or reduced tariff rate for Japanese vehicles, but Trump has, not been open to that. He's basically been saying that Japanese automakers export a lot of vehicles to the U.S., but the same isn't true. Going the other way to the same degree, and that's sort of been the big holdup. And from people I've talked with in the industry that have kind of been familiar with some of the talks going on, whether it's between Japan, Korea, and the U.S., or whether it's with the European Union, they kind of expect, especially in the EU's case. I was just talking with someone today who said that same thing with Europe. They want some sort of carve out for vehicles and parts, but they'd be pretty surprised if any framework included that. Obviously, things can change, but that seems to be something that Trump is holding pretty steady on. In the past few weeks, he's also kind of hinted that maybe he would even raise auto tariffs to a higher level to kind of incentivize more domestic manufacturing. We'll see if that happens, but it seems like he's not really wanting to back down off of auto tariffs, at least at the moment. Like you said, with the UK deal, there is that quota system that's in place now where 100,000 vehicles from the UK each year can come into the US at a lower 10% rate. But it seems like, at least for bigger markets that are export, like Japan and the EU, that might not necessarily be the case. So again, we'll see how things work out. Things can always change minute to minute, hour by hour, but that's sort of been a big holdup. Has been auto tariffs, even though we're talking about tariff rates that technically don't have to do with the auto tariffs themselves.
At least not by name, right? It's
Right. Exactly.
yeah, exactly. So, generally speaking, what's your sense of what automakers and suppliers are hoping for out of these talks?
Yeah, I think a lot of them would like some sort of system similar to what the UK got, but again, that might be elusive. But more than that, I think, especially in North America, as we look at U.S. suppliers, automakers that build vehicles here in the U.S. and in Canada and Mexico, they want more than anything else for the USMCA to sort of remain like the backbone of automotive trade. And so far, even with tariffs on Canadian and Mexican products, there have been exemptions that have been put in place on for USMCA compliant goods. You look at the auto tariffs, parts for that come from Canada and Mexico, as long as they meet the terms of USMCA, the rules of origin, which require certain levels of regional content and labor being paid at a certain level. As long as they meet those requirements, they can still, as of now at least, move back and forth without any tariffs. With vehicles, we see that there's still the 25% tariff, but it only applies to the value of non-U.S. content in those cars. And that's proven to be really beneficial. From everything it doesn't matter if I'm talking with a major supplier or a smaller one, anything in between. A lot of them basically credit those exemptions with maybe preventing the worst case scenarios that a lot of people were fearing a few months ago when tariffs were first being discussed, where there were a lot of fears that there could be major production disruptions within just a couple weeks of tariffs going into effect, because a lot of these smaller suppliers might not be able to handle these increased costs. That's not been the case so far, in large part because those USMCA rules are still in effect and still do something to keep that flow of goods between the three countries moving. So more than anything else, I think they want to keep seeing that. They'd like that strengthened. I'm sure they would love to see auto tariff rates on vehicles come down, especially if it's vehicles that contain a large number of American parts. But that seems to be the biggest thing they hear over and over, is just the importance of the USMCA.
Speaking of which, you have a news story out about a report that has interesting findings about the effects of the USMCA's auto rules on the industry over the past several years. Talk a little bit about what that report found and sort of the implications of that at this moment, where we're on the precipice of sort of rewriting a lot of trade rules.
Yeah, the U.S. International Trade Commission put out a report beginning of the month, basically detailing the economic impact of the USMCA's automotive rules of origin. Like I said, those rules dictate how the parts and vehicles can ship, over the borders without being subject to duties. And those rules, which include, again, labor, regional content rules, steel and aluminum requirements, have been pretty beneficial to suppliers, they found. U.S. suppliers have invested pretty significantly in the U.S. and they employ thousands of more workers. They've made hundreds of millions of more dollars in the U.S. than they would have otherwise under previous rules since the USMCA went into effect in July of 2020. On the flip side, though, it was a slight negative for automakers, by those same measures, profitability, how many people they employ, that sort of thing. They found that automakers are probably employing a few less people, making a handful of number of vehicles less in the U.S. than they would have otherwise. So those are kind of interesting findings where you see suppliers really benefiting from the USMCA. Meanwhile, automakers may be getting hurt slightly. I don't want to make it out to be like automakers were massively damaged by the USMCA. Far from it, but those findings are kind of interesting, especially because kind of in a lot of ways it makes sense. The USMCA was designed to force automakers to source more parts locally, and suppliers have followed suit. But because they're sourcing more parts from the U.S. or from Canada, which tend to be more expensive than maybe sourcing from outside the USMCA region, the prices of vehicles and the costs of manufacturing have gone up, which for automakers, obviously they'll hurt their bottom lines a little bit. But it'll be really interesting to see how this all plays out moving forward, especially just given these tariff discussions. USMCA is really at the heart of it, especially with discussions with Canada and Mexico. And I'm sure these findings are going to be part of what they're talking about, especially when they're discussing tariffs on vehicles and parts.
I have a feeling we'll be bringing those up a lot next year when this review comes into play, and you'll be covering that, I'm sure. John, I really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks for joining us on Daily Drive.
Thanks so much.
That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Jake Neer, in for Jamie Butters.
And I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to automotive news journalists Urvash Kakaria and Mark Homer for their reporting for today's podcast. We also had reporting from Kurt Nagel of our sibling publication, Crane's Detroit Business. You can get the latest news on trade talks, manufacturing, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com.
Come back tomorrow for a conversation with Pied Piper CEO Fran O'Hagan about how AI stacks up against humans when answering service phone calls.
The challenge is that sometimes the AI is thrown for a loop. Sometimes the customer calls, yes, I'd like scheduled maintenance, but I have a recall. Now, how long should I plan on staying? Do I need a service loaner?
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoy the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.